Can we just go back to this one?
Hi, everybody. Welcome. So I'm working to get Sally back in this call. This was totally my mistake. I had my times wrong, but I'm so glad that you are all here now. I'm just going to give it a second for you guys to all kind of filter in. Oh my gosh, welcome, everyone. So what I'm going to do is let you guys get comfortable for just a second while I make sure that my emails are all working so that Sally can get in here as well. So give me just a second, okay?
Hey, Sally, can you hear me?
Yes. Wait, we're on. Boy, this is.
Okay. All right, we are all good to go. Thank you, everyone, so much for your patience. Let's just hop right into it. Let's just skip the housekeeping and just go right into the meat, the good stuff. So, welcome everybody. So sorry for the technical difficulties. That was totally my mistake. But let me just introduce our wonderful speakers here tonight. So,
my notes are gone.
This is Sally Yamasaki. She has been a Lake Forest Park community member since 1960 with deep roots in our community. Ron Chu is a third-generation Seattleite who has spent decades fighting for Asian American and social justice in Seattle.
I need that
one. He served as editor of the International Examiner and as executive director of the Wing Luke Museum of the Pacific or Asian Pacific American
need this.
Experience.
Okay, there. That's good.
Books include
Just close this.
Reflections of Seattle's Chinese
Okay, thank you. I need
Americans,
this.
the First 100 Years, and
Need this.
Remembering Silmy Domingo. And Jean Viernes, The Legacy of Filipino American Labor Activism. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
I'll do this.
I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to our experts. All right.
I guess you're supposed to start, huh, Sally?
Wait, are we in the green room or are we?
No,
Are people here?
We're on
Oh,
stage.
you're good. You're live.
Oh, we're live. I couldn't tell. I don't feel live at this
I'm
point.
so sorry.
Welcome, everybody. No, Allie, it's okay. You know, with this COVID stuff, I get the dates completely wrong. The other day, I took my dog to the vet, and we showed up, and it was the wrong date. I came a day early, so I totally get it. Totally get it. Well, I guess we're here. Ron, hi, Ron. Good to see you. Welcome to Lake Forest Park. Kind of.
Yeah. Here. Yeah.
So we're here to talk about your book that you recently published, My Unforgotten Seattle. And I have to say there were so many great stories in here that I had, as you know, a hard time narrowing this interview down because there were so many areas that I wanted to talk about with you. But let's start because we don't have a whole lot of time. Allie, I'm not sure. Do we go now do we start here as our 0 mark or?
You go as long as you want, right?
Yeah, go. Yeah, just go for it. Let's stay for the hour. I think people want to hear what you've got to say.
Okay. Well, Ron, you know, in the introduction, you describe your process of how you decided to write your book. And you were talking about how you go on your early 5 a.m. morning runs. And at one point in your run, your mind drifted back to the many people who were your friends, your good friends, and were so foundational in the International District community and making it what it is today. And you said, I was reminded that our history is built on the precarious foundation of what is remembered. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that and why it was important for you to write this book?
Yeah. Well, thanks for being part of this program, Sally. You and I have been friends for almost a whole lifetime, and it's rare that you have those kind of friendships. So I appreciate your being sort of the co-conversationalist with me on this. This book, as you mentioned, really was born during a run back in 2016. I did these early morning runs just to clear my head and to be a little bit liberated from being in the house. And during that run, I did start drifting backwards. I thought about the murder of a close friend of mine, Donnie Chin, who was a medic in the Chinatown-International District area for many, many years. And he had been murdered, shot, and caught in the crossfire between 2 rival gangs. It did really feel like it was his time. But then I also started reflecting on so many of my other peers who had passed away, other activists in the neighborhood, Bob Santos, a longtime community organizer, Charles E. Smith, first African-American on the state Supreme Court. I was really close to his son, Kip Tokuda, state legislator, Rachel Adaka, who you know, or me, Sally, who worked at the community college, many, many others. And I thought to myself, well, I want to write about people I remember who are important, who a lot of folks may not have known. There were some other community folks, Sally, that you remember, Tomo Shoji, who as a Nisei created a one-woman play, and I had helped her with some of her development of her stories. And she was gone, and most people didn't remember her, but she was an amazing warrior. And I just didn't want these people to be forgotten. So I said, I'm going to write a book. Now, I had no idea how I was going to write it, but I was determined. And piece by piece, I decided, well, let's just pull together some stories that are important for me, that I think ultimately are important for our community to remember. So that's how the book was born. Let me just say one more thing, which is kind of funny. We're now existing in this Zoom era. A little bit strange. You kind of are having programs with people and you don't really see them. But I do appreciate everyone joining this program. And I did take a glance at the participants. It's pretty awesome. I saw some names of folks I hadn't seen or heard from in a long, long time. So,
Ron, how do you see that? I didn't never see how. Oh, anyway, forget about that part.
ask Grant to explain it to you.
Okay. So actually what you kind of just described was something that you had said, which was a quote was, as a journalist, you write about the stuff you know. To me, that is often the people who are unseen by the larger society, but who matter on the day-to-day and who managed to shape me. So those were some of the people who you wanted to capture and not let be forgotten.
Yeah. If I might mention the core of this, so there are people, but then I also said, well, my experience is important. It's the first time I kind of just said it to myself. I'm a journalist. I'm usually writing about other folks, but then I started reflecting on my experience as the child of third generation, as Allie said, Asian American. I'm the first generation American born, which really happened because of the complexities of our immigration laws. My grandfather came here illegally because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So I followed the paper trail and interviewed my parents, fortunately, before they passed away, to figure out the tangled web of how they got here. My grandfather came illegally because Chinese laborers were barred from coming here by the exclusion law. Which meant that my father came here illegally. And there was a trail which led to my mother coming here. And then I reflected on my experience growing up, because immigration, the fear of immigration authorities was always present. And it, a lot of Chinese Americans never shared that. And I wanted to share that because we're now in a generation of folks who, yet another generation of folks coming over here for survival and to seek a better life. And we're subjecting them to this big shadow of living in the shadows with full rights. I also wrote about my parents who worked, were part of Seattle history. My father worked as a waiter at a restaurant called the Hong Kong Restaurant, Hong Kong Cafe, for 30 some years, and it was invisible. We often talk about Chinese food and our favorite dishes, but do we ever think about the people who served us, who spent a lifetime living off of tips? I wrote about my mother, who was a sewing woman in the factories which used to line the waterfront downtown, southeast Seattle. Nothing having documented about their lives. So as I started thinking about my story and other people's stories, and then even Sally, this is where our lives re-intersected in creating an exhibit on Japanese American incarceration. How much had those stories been shared between generations? So I had a sense of purpose, and I worked on this crazy project, running in the morning, coming back and writing, making some food for my family, and then going off to work. And it was a journey.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you made that journey for all of us. And in fact, when I was reading your book, I couldn't really put it into one genre. I mean, is it a history book? Is it an autobiography? Or is it, I always liked to be able to open the book anywhere and read one chapter. And so I thought, is it a collection of social justice short stories? And I think in one of your interviews, Bill Radke of KUOW said in an interview that your book was the most Seattle book he had ever read. You know, why do you think he said that? And how would you describe your book?
Well, growing up, I never really saw myself as part of Seattle history, largely because, you take classes in the public schools, and given the way that the Asian American community was covered, and still to this day, you're sort of like a perpetual foreigner. So you saw your place in that history. And so the writing of the book was sort of an affirmation that, I'm a third generation Chinese American. My grandfather came here in 1911 to work in the salmon canning industry, and he settled here. He's buried here in Seattle. I have uncles and aunts who've been here. So, but I have one step here and one step in China because of the exclusion law and the difficulty of women coming over here. My parents are separated for over 10 years in two different places. So the book was an affirmation, that we matter in Seattle history, and that this is what we did. We may have been sweeping floors, we may have been working behind these inside these buildings and these factories, sewing clothing and down fabrics, and we may have been, washing dishes and bussing tables, but our sweat and labor, our presence, we have stories. We're part of Seattle history.
And I think the thing for me as well is by you sharing your history, which, like you said, are the people who are behind the scenes, it gives us all permission to be proud of our history.
Yeah.
So thank you for that too.
Yeah.
So there, one thing is, this is a thick book you wrote, and yet it's just really engaging because I think partly it's not just history, but it's also intertwined with a lot of your personal stories that, like you said, gives voice a lot to those who are oftentimes not able to write a book like this and share their experiences. So it gives voice to them, but it also gives the readers who do not have the experience the opportunity to feel what it is like to be in their shoes as well. And I thought what I would do is just read in a couple places some of the touching areas that I found at the beginnings of when you were going to school. And we'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. And then there's a section that's somewhat, there's a lot of humorous sections, but I just picked one. So I wanted to read from chapter 7, and it's a segment from Surviving Elementary School. I'm going to read 2 segments, if that's okay with you. So it goes, during the first week of kindergarten, we were asked to sketch a picture or build something with wooden blocks. I decided it would be fun to build a house. I stacked blocks to make 4 walls, then added 2 windows and 2 doors. Before class ended, the teacher came around asking each of us to describe our creations. Can you tell the class what this is, Ronald? I wanted to say that I had built a house, but I didn't know the English word. Long silence, no response. My teacher tried another question. Can you tell us where the front door is, Ronald? This time, I was puzzled by the question. I interpreted it literally. I knew what a door was, but how could I say which was the front and which was the back? These were just blocks. More silence. The teacher again. Where is the front door, Ronald? Please tell the class. By now I was totally embarrassed by the attention of the other kids, paralyzed with fear. Another long silence. Mercifully, the teacher moved on to the next person. So I'm going to go down the page a little bit onto another segment, and it goes, on another occasion, in either kindergarten or first grade, my mother came into the school looking for me, waiting to walk me home. She usually stood outside, but this time she entered the building because my last class had run late. When she finally spotted me, she asked, why was I late? A white administrator came forward and interjected, is this your mother? I said yes. Can you please tell her that if she wants to come inside the school, she needs to speak English? My mother, seeing the school official, smiled, trying to be friendly. What did he say? My mother asked me in Chinese. I didn't respond to either my mother or the school authority, but my face turned red. I grabbed my mother's hand, pulling her to the front door. Let's go, I begged. Outside, my mother again asked me, what did the man say? Did you do something bad? I told her it was nothing. But from that day forward, I made sure to leave class early as early as I could so that my mother wouldn't come inside the school. That incident made me deeply ashamed to be Chinese. Do you want to comment at all? I mean,
Yeah. Well, there were many moments like that I had buried kind of deep in my memory for over many years. This book really gave me an opportunity to share those. You reach a certain age, ripe old age, and then you realize that perhaps these stories being shared can have some value, both to myself, because I'm able to kind of pinpoint the source of some of the anxiety that I experienced during my growing up years, but it also perhaps can share something that other folks went through as well. And there's value in that, people seeing that they're not alone. So there are quite a number of these stories that are part of the text. And it was it was a process really of remembering and then interpreting. But as you mentioned, Sally, it's a really thick book, 600 pages, and so it can be daunting to folks. I'm surprised because people said it really read fast, and you actually read the whole thing, knowing that you're like a book reader type. So I tried to keep things simple, and to the extent possible, just tell the story. So many years later, I shared that story. Actually, this was during an era where Roberto Maestas was director of Centro de la Raza, which was the old Beacon Hill School where I went to grade school. And so the Latino Chicano community back then took over the school and repurposed it. And then he was crowned King Neptune during a Seafair event. And he invited me to the event. And it's interesting because so many years later, I shared that story during his honorary coronation. I once was in the school building, and it was a very different time, and my mom wasn't welcomed. And here it's a different place, and you've taken it over. So doing the memoir allowed me to move through time, to see how the world has changed, and in many ways how it hasn't changed, how there still are many challenges that we face as a society that we need to tackle.
Absolutely. I wanted to balance that last one off and read another segment. It's more of the humorous kind of side. It's chapter, can you guess? 8.
Okay.
And it's the searching for a jockstrap. I blossomed in my final year at Mercer. I was still terribly shy, but at least I didn't freeze when my name was called in class. I contributed 2 pieces of a creative writing magazine in my 8th grade class. The magazine editor was Kip Tokuda, a popular outgoing classmate I would come to know much better in high school and college. I was flattered when Marilyn told me she loved my writing. One piece was a humorous satire titled, "Will Somebody Hold My Peanut Butter Sandwich?" And the other was a scary tale about a haunted attic that led into a peaceful garden. The scary story I had polished over and over at home, using a pocket thesaurus, Sol's Dictionary of English Synonyms, to create an H.G. Wells style first-person narrative. I had purchased Wells's classic sci-fi thrillers, The Time Machine and War of the Worlds, through Scholastic Books. I knew his Victorian prose style and voice well. I excelled in PE. I usually got an A or a B. I was rail thin and could do an endless number of push-ups, chin-ups, bent knee sit-ups. When we did leg lifts lying on a mat on our backs, I was usually able to hold my legs up longer than anyone else. Many of the extremely skinny Asian kids like me were good in the rope climbing competitions. We pulled ourselves up, hand over hand, to the top of the thick ropes, suspended from the gym rafters, then descended to the gym floor. I hated the rope burns I got on the way down. During the first week of school, the gym teacher, a fit-looking white guy in a flat top hairstyle, white t-shirt, gray sweatpants, and white sneakers, introduced himself. He held a clipboard and draped a whistle around his neck. He barked out a set of rules. We were assigned to odd and even numbered squads. We were required to dress in a clean white t-shirt, white gym shorts, sweat socks, white or black tennis shoes, and a jock strap. This was our PE uniform. Every Monday, we were inspected. We were penalized for wearing dirty shorts. "Let me show you what a jockstrap is, young men," he said, emphasizing the word men. He held a sample jockstrap high above his head. He splayed open the cup with his fist, then yanked on the elastic strap that was supposed to wrap tightly around our butt. "Get one," he bellowed. "Wear it all the time during my gym class. It will protect you." During strenuous physical activity, he warned, one or both of our balls could pop right out of their nutsack. This could result in irreparable harm to our family jewels. We might not be able to have kids. His warning quieted the gymnasium. A few kids snickered. I told my parents what I needed. I already had a few white undershirts. I could buy white shorts at Chubby Tubby, but where could I find a jockstrap? How could I explain to my mother what it was? My father helped interpret. Tom, who's your brother, had come to my father with the same request. My mother frowned. She wondered what kind of brutal contact sport we were engaged in. My parents went to the usual shopping places, Sears, JCPenney, and Woolworths. No luck with jockstraps. I joined them on the hunt at Woolworths. The store was at the corner of 3rd Avenue and Pike. It had a long luncheonette counter which served blue plate specials like hamburgers, meatloaf, and liver and onions. The candy center sold ropes of licorice and single lollipops strung together in a long, clear plastic wrapped strands. We occasionally bought a batch of fried chicken wings to take home in a white paper bag. After we struck out at Woolworths, we walked to the Bon Marché, just 1 block away. The Bon, as it was called for short, was a big department store, a full pedigree above JCPenney and Sears. A sales lady told us that the Bon did indeed stock jockstraps. They were on the 3rd floor of the boys' wear department. My mother refused to take the escalator. She believed that it might pull her beneath the floor and crush her. I snickered. I thought it was strange that she feared the escalator more than she did the wickedly dangerous industrial sewing machines at work. My father and mother walked over to the elevators. I took the escalator. As I prepared to step onto the 3rd floor, the back of, I'm sorry, this is funny. The back of of one sneaker got caught in the teeth of the escalator. It was a scary moment. I'm sorry, I think this is funny, Ron. I yanked free, but not before the escalator ripped a chunk of rubber from my shoe. I felt guilty for poo-pooing my mother's fear. I regained my composure by the time she and my father met me. I didn't say a word. Okay, and then you go on and talk about the continuation of the purchasing of the jockstrap. But I picked that partly because it kind of showed how you had changed as a person, but also, you know, it's humorous and becomes, you know, the way you write, and it gives an idea of that, but also your detail and how just by describing this story about getting a jockstrap, you captured a time warp of what Seattle was like. I got those same chicken at Woolworths, you know. I don't think I ever sat at the lunch counter, but how did you, I was up throughout your book, it's like the detail you have here. I'm always amazed at how you remembered all this, or how did you even get all this detail in here?
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that story. You know, I'm sure you found both humor and some poignancy and some sorrow throughout.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in telling stories, if they're genuine, there's a piece of all of that in all of our stories. You know, there's tragedy, there's humor, there's laughter, there's sorrow. You know, you know, I was trying to be genuine, which means you've got a mix of everything. How did I remember? Well, I can look back on it and laugh now at myself, but remember, I was scared. So I mean, I was embarrassed because, like, I got to get a jockstrap, but I can't get one because I can't even explain what the heck it is. You know, and then my mother, we don't have any money, so where are we going to, you know, I feel bad because I'm imposing on them, you know, for expense that I need. And by the way, it wasn't very comfortable either, as I in that story. Back in the day, those things were really scratchy and irritable to wear. But one thing I realized, perhaps a skill that I didn't realize I had, was ability to remember detail, vivid detail. I struggled with school in my early years, and I realized now in hindsight, it was probably what they describe as ADHD. My mind was always racing, you know, so that was one of my sort of handicaps. Another problem was I just didn't speak the language. So, you know, growing up in a Chinese speaking home in my early years, then transitioning to school, I had no idea what was going on for the longest time. So I just kept quiet. And transition between two different worlds of language was really hard. Ultimately, you know, when you're in those developmental years, without the proper social support, you have to make a choice, you know, but it's not so easy, just kind of like migrate into one realm or the other. So you're stuck, you're kind of caught. And that's what happened to me. So a lot of these memories are very vivid because of that. Because of just, you know, type of personality, you know, I just remember vivid details. And then I did a lot of research too. Just, you know, I chatted with old school friends, and, you know, as they talked about their experiences, then I could sort of remember more of my experiences. So I envision memoir as sort of a collaborative kind of work. If you look at the credits, there are well over 100 people that I reached out to in conversations, emails. It was pre-COVID, but, you know, we sat down for lunch and so forth. So I did a lot of cross-checking, and I kept a journal, a diary in college, which I continued for a chunk of time. And remember, I was a reporter journalist, so I saved a lot of notes from stories I had done. So I had a lot of material to work from, but I worked quickly, relatively quickly. It's a 3-year project, 3-year process, but it was a lot of work because I had a full-time job. And, you know, being a full-time single parent as well, you know, I had to find time. So it was right after my early morning runs that I would do a little bit of writing here and there and try to pull it together.
Yeah. You know, when I think about the different periods in your life, it seems like there's a thread that follows throughout your life in the book for me, from your experience of as a child going to school with having first generation immigrant parents where English is not their first language, and then going to the UW for journalism, applying to be the editor of the UW daily newspaper and being completely competent for the job, but not even being considered for the position, and then eventually ending up in a racial discrimination complaint. But then that led you to the, running and editing the nonprofit community newspaper, the International Examiner, and that too wasn't easy. You had to take on another job so you could keep working at the Examiner, and it wasn't easy to get ads for the paper because it was a small community paper in a community that a lot of ads maybe didn't support and didn't know how to support. And then you taking on the job of, the executive director of the Wingwood Museum, again, when it was a point of closing down. And I was just thinking at each one of these points in your life, you didn't give up in spite of the difficulties. And in the end, you turned things around and created these huge, amazing anchors for our community. And I came across this quote, it was UW Press, and it says, in describing you, they said, you spent more than 5 decades fighting for Asian American and social justice causes in Seattle. I guess I wanted to ask, is that what was at the heart of your perseverance for all of those experiences? And what does fighting for social justice mean to you?
Well, 5 decades, my God, that's half a century. I'm just, that's a long time, which means I'm pretty old, which I realized already. I've always been the type of person to follow my passions. I wanted to be a writer, and it took me over 6 decades to write this, to get to a place where I could write this memoir. So if nothing else, I'm persistent. I had some great role models along the way. My parents, they didn't, economically, we weren't privileged in that way, but, they took care of the family. They took care of us, kept us clothed and sheltered and fed. And that took a lot of strength and courage and resourcefulness. So I had some great role models. Tomo Shoji, the Nisei woman who did the one-woman show, she was a good friend during the time she, spent. I enjoyed the privilege of knowing her during the latter part of her life when she created the one-woman show. And, it was incredibly, in her 70s, like, I'm going to create this one-woman show. Never been on stage. Like, I'm just going to do it, That
was a great show. It was an amazing show.
Yeah. And then, there's a chapter, one of my favorite chapters, on my mother learning English. She was persistent. After she retired from the sewing factory, she wanted to learn English because she wanted to be understood when she went to the grocery store. She wanted to be respected by her children, because by that point, we were conversing with her mostly in English, because we had lost a lot of our fluency in Chinese. And, so I'd go over to the house and we'd do English lessons on a regular basis. She went to Seattle Community College, where you work, Sally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was the oldest student in her class. And she never really mastered it, because it becomes really hard when you're at that age to master a new language, but she never gave up. She'd watch TV and pick up words while she was listening to music on the Tammy Faye Baker, Jim Baker program, all these odd programs that she watched. She'd copy down the words. I'd come over and we'd look up the word, explain it. During that time period, then she, we used a little Chinese English dictionary. She taught me how to read and write Chinese, so we exchanged, we traded, but she never gave up. Even though in her remaining years, it all kind of fell away. So I had some great inspirations. Working with you on the exhibit on the Japanese American incarceration, 50th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. You were one of the catalysts in helping create that exhibit, you and your family, your parents, your extended family. And you probably remember, that exhibit rescued the museum. It was on the brink of failure. But then we all collectively said, well, no, this exhibit is important. And it doesn't matter, we don't have a professional museum curator. But we can create a powerful story that has relevance. And so I was inspired by your work on helping create that exhibit, which ultimately raised funds from the community. It was a grassroots organizing effort, which ultimately led to the creation of the new museum. So you're part of that. You're in the book too, with a number of, I'm sure, brought back memories for you, right?
Our time, yeah. And it's funny because my next thing was going to be Let's Talk Museum. But our time is kind of, I don't know how we're doing on time. Is Allie there? Or could we just keep going?
I'm here. You guys have, you have time. Maybe start leaning towards questions in like 10 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. I'm gonna, it's a shame because the next section was going to be about the museum, and there's a lot of different questions, but maybe we can go a little faster through that because the Wing Luke Museum, I don't know if people know, do you want to explain? It was named after
how
its namesake.
Yeah, so Wing Luke was a Seattle City Council member, first Asian American elected to the Seattle City Council, and one of the first Asian American elected officials in the Pacific Northwest and in the country. It was his vision to create a community-based institution that would preserve the history of those who settled from Asia here in this region. Unfortunately, he died in a plane crash at a young age. And so after he passed away, the community came together to create the museum in his memory and honor. So that's sort of the origins of the museum. And then I came aboard as, I think, third director and the first Asian American paid director of the museum.
Right, and it's actually won many awards. And what I didn't realize, it was also the first Smithsonian affiliate in the Pacific Northwest, which was news to me. But it was, I'm going to jump ahead here.
Yeah.
One thing within this whole world of museology, you developed sort of a new approach to developing exhibits. I think there was a conventional way of going to the experts who would then tell the story of a community. And you kind of went to the community and kind of established this community-based model that you utilized. Do you want to just talk a little about that?
Yeah, so when I was hired at the museum, it was actually Betty Luke, the younger sister of Wing Luke, who encouraged me to apply. And I told her at the time, well, I don't know anything about museums. I had never, why would they hire me? But she encouraged me. She said, well, we want to take a new direction. And it doesn't matter that you don't have a museology background or that you've worked in a museum. We admire the community organizing work you've done. So I applied, and to my astonishment, I was hired. And I thought there was a new direction that the museum could take that would be of great relevance. My interest was in oral histories and people's stories. I wasn't interested necessarily in the stuff. Museums traditionally were based on collections of objects. And to me, the objects were only important to the extent that they were illustrative of people's experiences. So I was interested in gathering stories and making them the centerpiece of the gallery rather than the objects, around the role of those components of the museum experience.
Can I ask, why do you think it's important for communities to tell their own stories?
Well, I think that there's value in that. Ultimately, communities get strengthened when stories are shared between generations. And unless a community is empowered to do that, you lose so much. And, a community is only as strong as the web that you develop between folks who represent different eras.
Mm-hmm. And I know also within our community, the Japanese American community, it did offer the opportunity to, one, tell your story that had been quieted for so long, and to begin the healing process in that journey. I'm going to jump ahead. In your last chapter, you surprised me that you were able to capture the current history with the COVID pandemic and the George Floyd murder that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. And in that last chapter, there is a feeling of a full circle that you had made in your life. From the beginning of the book, you're this younger person doing all these things for the community. And now being the older generation, at the end of the story, here you are, the older generation of the community. But you leave the reader with a feeling of optimism. You say, my spirit holds strong. Can you just touch upon that a bit and what you meant by my spirit holds strong?
Yeah. The last chapter, which you referenced, was created in a bit of a rush. I had to rely on my journalistic instincts. The book had pretty much been written and we're ready to go to press, but during that time period, COVID-19 virus broke out. There was a challenge of trying to deal with some of the health challenges in the Chinatown-International District area. I was working at International Community Health Services. We were on the front line of dealing with that issue. Meanwhile, George Floyd murder and a lot of the unrest that happened, the vandalism, the shuttering of many of the businesses made up that neighborhood. So in the midst of all of this, I realized, well, if I do this memoir and it comes out and there's, we're in the midst of this pandemic and there's no mention of it, it's not going to be relevant. I mean, it will be relevant, but, I'm a news guy from journalism background, so I got to put this in. So I hurried around and created a last chapter in about a week or so. I just wrote it, did some research and so forth, again, relying on my journalistic background. It ends on a positive note with me going to the Thai Tung restaurant to pick some almond chicken and a few conversations. But I was hopeful because the next generation really has been part of the rebuilding. They've gone into the hotels and low-income apartments to make sure the seniors are taken care of, that they have food and are safe. And I was inspired by that. After the businesses were vandalized and glass was shattered, and there were some white supremacists stickering the neighborhood with stuff, because of President Trump's labeling of the pandemic as the Wuhan Chinese virus. I was actually harassed during one of my morning runs too. Young folks came forward and created these wonderful murals on top of the plywood that was covering the shattered glass. And saw the blossoming of art. I saw the energy and spirit of young folks of another generation. So that's why my spirit holds strong. I see promise, I see work ahead, but I see a new generation blooming. It's not my time really anymore. People try to pull me into a lot of meetings and things. I back off because I'm in a little different space, and it really is time for leadership for the next generation, for them to take on the struggle.
Yeah, that's right. Well, finally, that's right. You are retired now.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem so, because you still seem so busy. But what future plans do you have? I mean, I hear there's a second printing of the book and possibly an audio book that
Yeah,
you're in the
yeah.
works.
I'm glad you asked that. There is an audiobook that actually, Sally, your daughter suggested. She said, well, some people don't really like reading book. You know, I said, well, hey, what do you think? And audiobook. So I'm going to be partnering with the Washington State Talking Book and Braille Library, John Pye, a good friend who works there, to create an audio book version of this. So on your morning runs or whenever you're running around, doing your errands, you can listen to me read the book. I will be trained to have to figure this out, to read this thing. Yes, my Unforgotten Seattle. That's in the works. I also was thinking, well, maybe I'll create a podcast. So I've been playing with that idea of, putting in podcast form a lot of the stories that, provide some more long form conversations to delve a little more deeply into people's lives and stories that have been shared. So looking forward to that. Michelle Kamada, a mutual friend, I've been talking to her, trying to get her to help me illustrate a children's book. Because,
cool.
The memoir, for those who haven't read it, it reads quickly, mainly because I was inspired by a lot of children's books. As I was trying to figure out how do I write a memoir, I realized some of the best children's books are written with great clarity and simplicity, and that would be a great model for creating my own work. And so that enabled me to keep things very simple, very, very simple. We tend to overwrite. We tend to think we're so smart and show off our, language skills and so forth. I just wanted to communicate and be very basic. So those are a few of the projects. I should mention, just this is a little bit of a plug, I know, but those of you who are interested in purchasing the book, other than through Third Place Books, which of course you should support, you can also purchase it through the International Examiner, because all the proceeds from sales of the book will go to benefit the newspaper, which is one of the last remaining nonprofit Asian American community newspapers left in the country. So you'll be helping a great cause there.
Thank you, Ron. That's it. I conclude. I skipped some questions so we could skip to the questions now.
Yeah, how do we want to do this, Allie? And I'm mindful of time. You guys have been patient. Still see almost everybody still here. Wow.
How can you tell? I can just see you, me, and Allie.
Look at the number of participants. Yeah. So you'll know it's time to end when there's nobody left, right, Allie?
I figure they'll probably stay.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
A few questions. So you can go ahead and steer us on this.
So here, let me pull up a question that I have here from Anne. She says, "Thank you for writing this book. Your book is so important. We know too little about the wonderful immigrant communities here that make this place special. How has it been received inside and outside the Chinese American, Asian American communities?"
It's been truly amazing. I didn't have huge expectations for this. We printed 2,500 copies. I've been getting emails from UW Press, who is helping market. I have a marketing arrangement with them. And so they're pushing for a second edition. I said, what? He said, yeah, it's on back order on Amazon. It's crazy. Wow. So the response has been really good. It just has been quite stunning. The response from a lot of folks I grew up with has been like, wow, that I just somebody on Beacon Hill, I live still on Beacon Hill. I bumped into during my morning run. She says, I've read the book 3 times already. So I said, wow. She says, well, because that's our experience. That's what we lived through. And so it was truly amazing from those like you, Sally, and a lot of your friends, like, wow, I see myself in these stories.
Mm-hmm.
that was really important. But then there are others who, from the larger Seattle community, Bill Radke's comment, so forth. People remember Chubby and Tubby and Woolworths and J.C. Penney, and these are places that are no longer. And so capturing that really enabled them to connect with a part of their past, to remember things, and then to also begin to understand a community that perhaps they lived in parallel with, but didn't quite understand as much or know. The rest where my father worked, people said, I used to eat here. Wow, I remember that place. And now they know, because I wrote from the point of view of someone having worked there for over 10 years. Because we tend to be, there's a lot of anonymousness of these waiters. And I saw that with my father. A lot of people treated him with great respect, but there are also others who were pretty racist in some of their comments. But I wanted to share the stories of people, actual real people. So I name people, and I share some of their history and stories and interactions I had with them. And I thought that was really important to humanize. So in answer to the question, it's been pretty amazing. It's crossed a number of boundaries I didn't think it would.
I totally agree. The buzz on this has been really exciting to see. So let's see. I have a question here from Yolanda. It says, "Hola, Ron. Congrats on your new book. I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm looking back at the Asian question. In looking back, here we go. Okay, question. In looking back at the Asian and Chicano movements, what do you see as similarities and a united front that can be pursued considering the rising of right-wing and neo-Nazis?" Gracias, Yolanda.
Well, hola, Yolanda. I'm assuming it's Yolanda Alanis, old college cohort from the UW. It's great to I don't really see you, but to connect. In terms of, I guess, a movement and trying to unite around themes, I think there's a lot of shared experiences. The immigration is a huge issue that continues to this very day. The way that this country treats immigrants, the affirmation of basic human rights. I work in the health care realm as well. So there's a lot of health care disparity issues. It runs the gamut also in terms of, climate, environmental justice issues. So there's a whole realm of things. I think we can come together around some shared experiences to share the history, and then to come together where we can on a common agenda. I think we have an opportunity now. There is a new president, new administration in DC, but we've got to push. So I'm optimistic.
Well said. So I think probably have time for one or two more questions. So if anyone in the audience has anything else they would like to ask, now is the time. In the meantime, I had a question. I was wondering, you were talking earlier about some of the things that you were remembering that kind of surprised you. What was the most pleasurable, what was something that you remembered that you just loved? What was something that brought a lot of joy in revisiting the past?
Boy, let's see. Sally, are there any pleasurable moments from the humor that, a lot of it for me is, being able to hear other people's stories and how, that it affected me in terms of, giving me things to think about. There's a story I shared about a woman named Lily Yamada, who lived in my apartment building in the Chinatown-International District. She was a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing. She was one of the Baksha, those who were affected by the bomb. And I bumped into her every morning before she went to the hair salon at Awajimaya, the old Awajimaya. And, she just would tell me, her life experiences and how she survived and some of her struggles. Sharing that time was very memorable, but it also, taught me a lot about life and about not taking things for granted. So those are the moments that give me pleasures where, I see people and I learn something from them. There are folks like the Filipino dishwasher at the Hong Kong restaurant, called him Mommy. And, his dreams and hopes of getting married late in life and leaving the restaurant. Bill Wong, the waiter at the Hong Kong restaurant, who, wanted to start a hair salon in Vancouver, BC, and ultimately left. I never found out what happened to him. So these stories really gave me a lot of pleasure learning about people's lives.
I think, can I add to this a bit?
Yeah.
I think for me, the pleasurable part too was kind of what I was saying, I had said earlier, was that as you get older, so many things change. People in your life disappear. And the only time you get to really revisit them is when you have a conversation or talk about them. But as you get older, there's less and less people who know what the Bon Marché is or can talk about the chicken at Woolworths in the white bag and, cresses on the corner, and, can go on and on and on. And so it was really comforting in some ways for me that period of history is now there, that I can always open the book and go back and remember, Tai Tung and remember, Uncle Bob, or all the different people who were there and made up so much a part of the community. Yeah, it's like, because of that book, they never have to disappear.
Yeah.
That was so well put. Thank you guys both so much. So I have a few comments that I would love to read here. First, CJ says, I remember Woolworths. And then let's see. Anne says, Sally, you are a wonderful communicator. I really appreciate the thoughtful choices you've made in your interview with Ron. And the vibe between you is such good friends. Thanks.
Is that Ann Stadler?
Yes, it is.
Oh, Ann is such a sweetheart. Thank you.
So, she also says, you created anchors for our whole community. That's what moves me so much. And I think that we can all sort of agree with that. So thank you guys so much for being here. Is there anything else that you would like to say to kind of close us out here?
Ron?
Well, this has been a lot of fun. Sally, you're the best.
Oh, Ron.
Hey.
It's been great. And I do thank our LFP community. It's an amazing community, just as the International District community. It's what we do, right, Ron? It's what the people do to make it a thriving, wonderful place.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ron, for all the work you've done.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody.
Yeah,
whoever you are. And ask Dan to explain to you how the little participant box will show you the names of who's part of the conversation. So, yeah. Okay, time for dinner. Hi, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so sorry about that shaky start. But everyone in the audience, thank you so much for bearing with us. And I'm seeing all of your love notes in the comments, and they're so beautiful. Thank you guys so much. And we'll have a good dinner.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.